Hello students, in the previous program we have already discussed about the elements of graphic design, and today we are going to discuss about the principles of graphic design. There are several principles of design that have evolved over a period of time. Understanding and practical application of these principles is varied and diverse depending on the designer's attitude and overall approach. These principles are used in various fields like graphic design, industrial design, fine arts, and architecture. They are understood and interpreted according to the need of the profession. However, there is certain consensus among practicing designers all across the disciplines about their nature and utility. Some of the definitions of these principles are accepted and shared across all the disciplines. By and large, it is agreed that they are generic principles related to design sensitivity, and designers use them to arrange or organize the basic elements of design so that overall composition looks appealing. These principles govern the relationship among various components and basic elements of design. These are the principles of aesthetic arrangement of components of design. They also govern the relationship of parts of design to the overall design. Successful application of these principles help a designer to achieve the purpose of graphic composition and visual goals. In any work of art or design, the consideration of form, that is, overall structure and its relationship with individual components, fitness and unity has become a great source of beauty. Every work of art or design supposes unity of graphical basic elements depicted by the artist or designers in the composition. The beauty or elegance of design is considered as the expression of design emerging out of principles of design such as balance, unity, consistency along with careful implementation of variety with rhythm. Balance. Let's take an example of balance from everyday life, like riding a bicycle. It is used for controlling gravity. Graphic designers apply same principle to control the visual gravity or visual weight of various components in a composition or a design. The principle of balance provides a visual stability to design. There are three types of balance. Number 1, radial balance. Number 2, symmetrical or formal balance. Number 3, asymmetrical or informal balance. Let's first talk about number 1, radial balance. In radial balance, there can be multiple visual axes and all should converge to one single point. It is interesting to try out the possibility of having radial symmetry, where the convergence point needs not to be in the center of the composition. The center point can be anywhere in the composition. With little bit more practice, you can achieve this. Radial balance generates radiating visual effect. Most of the flowers have radial symmetry. Symmetrical or formal balance. It is the most common balance and all of us are familiar with it. Designers achieve this by placing graphic elements in one part of the composition and then mirror it in the remaining part of the composition. You can divide the composition vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. The line of division is called visual axis. In symmetrical balance, preferably there should be only one axis. The main difference between the radial balance and symmetrical balance is that symmetrical balance needs one visual axis, while radial balance requires multiple axes and there should be convergence point. Radial balance is the advanced and complex type of symmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance and radial balance are visually appealing and widely used widespread across all civilizations. However, beyond a point, they become predictable and visually uninteresting. Many people do not favor them. Therefore, designers use them with caution. Now let's talk about asymmetrical or informal balance. Informal balance is achieved when the elements of composition are not arranged along with and or across the visual axis. On the other hand, informal balance is achieved only in terms of visual weight of all basic elements spread over the entire composition. To achieve this, you need to imagine or assume a visual axis of the composition and then arrange basic elements one by one in such a way that they should not appear like a mirror or a repetitive image of each other. Let's understand this with the help of an example. If you place one large form of mirror image of each other, for instance, if you place one large form, one place in the composition, then other part of the composition elements may be of smaller size but having equal visual weight. You can continue this process of placing visual elements in a composition till you are satisfied with the overall visual balance of the composition. While achieving informal balance, many factors play an important role. It requires proper understanding of visual weights of all the basic elements with their relational properties in the composition. For instance, dots and their sizes, lines and their thickness, thinness and movement, positive and negative space, visual and relational properties of colors, various colors and their relative impact, relative visual weights of color hues, color values and color luminosities. So students, here it is important to see that achieving informal balance in a composition requires practice and deep understanding. However, it is not difficult because it is a natural tendency of human to seek balance and therefore designers follow their visual sensitivity and intuition to achieve informal balance in their compositions. Students, do you know what is rhythm? Let me talk about it. When a basic element or a motif in a composition is repeated with variation to guide the eye movement of the audience, gradually from one part of the composition to the other part of the composition is an elegant way. Then it is called visual rhythm. If one motif is repeated again and again, then it will create a rhythm, but it will be boring. But if, while repeating the motif, there is a little variation with each variation in terms of orientation, like size, color, or any attribute of the motif, then the resultant rhythm will not be boring. Basic elements and the relational elements can be organized to achieve interesting pattern of rhythm. Visual order leads to a generation of rhythm in a composition. Now, what is proportion? Proportion is the relative ratio between or among various components of a composition, as well as between a particular component or a group of components and the overall form of the composition. The ratio can be expressed as a mathematical formula. However, in visual composition, proportion is understood as a relative ratio in terms of visual weight, size, visual thrust, and other visual relational properties of the components. There are few well-established ratios accepted in the fields of art and design. Golden mean or golden ratio, which is also called as golden proportion, is based on the Fibonacci series. If two sides of a rectangle follow the ratio of 1:1, 6:1,8, then that rectangle is called a golden rectangle. A famous painting titled The Last Supper, painted by Leonardo da Vinci, follows the golden ratio. Many such ratios are well known and can lead to interesting visual composition. For instance, some of the following ratios can result in interesting compositions like 1:1, 1:2, 2:3, 3:4, 4:5, and 5:6. Students, we have talked about the rhythm and proportion. Now let's talk about harmony. When two or more components in a composition are in complete conformity or unison with each other, then their combination results in harmony. If the components are not in perfect unison but adhere to the certain ratios, then it is considered proportionate unison. Various color schemes discussed earlier are good examples of proportionate color harmony. There can be harmony of color, shape, size, form, etc. Skillful application of the principle of harmony leads to a pleasant visual impact. Contrast. When two or more components of a composition have an opposite visual impact in terms of certain attribute, then the resultant impact is called, contrast. There can be a contrast of color, value, size, etc. There can also be a proportionate contrast. For example, if white and black come together, then they will produce maximum opposite visual impact. In terms of value, on a grayscale, white has highest value while black has the lowest value in terms of tonality. But if gray and black are put nearby each other, then they will produce medium contrast. If any two nearby gray values from the grayscale are put together, then they will produce low contrast. Therefore, there can be three categories of proportionate contrast: high, medium, and low. If you look at the color wheel, then any two colors which are opposite to each other on the color wheel will produce high color contrast. Therefore, we have standard pairs of contrasting colors like yellow violet, orange blue, and red green. Any two nearby colors on the color wheel will produce low color contrast. Any two colors on triads will produce medium color contrast. There can be contrast of value, color, shapes, size, lines, and form, and so on and so forth. Now let's talk about what is center of interest. In a visual composition, a component or a group of components are placed in such a way that they attract the attention of the viewer. Visual composition should always have a center of interest. It is achieved by skillful application of the principles of contrast. It is also achieved through deliberate emphasis on certain elements in a composition and deliberate subordination of certain other elements in a composition. There is another way of achieving it by isolating one element or component from the rest of the components in the composition. The isolated component will capture the attention of the viewer. What is organic unity? Organic unity is the most important principle of composition. It is the quality of a composition that makes it visually complete. In such a composition, neither you can add an extra element nor you can remove any. It is the state of achieving visual perfection in a composition. In nature, for instance, if a branch of a tree is cut, then you always feel something is missing from the tree. A tree looks incomplete because by cutting a branch, the organic unity of a tree is disturbed. In a visual composition, organic unity is achieved by optimum, appropriate and skillful use of elements and principles of composition. Even we have got some activities for you to practice. Activity 1 for you is to study the radial symmetry of different flowers and analyze it. Activity 2, color also produces value contrast. Now select any two colors from the color wheel and find out whether they belong to high, low or medium value contrast. Activity 3, explore various possibilities of high, low and medium contrast of lines in terms of width of lines or expressive character of lines. Activity 4, observe nature and find out how principles of design or composition are manifested in nature and how they contribute in achieving organic unity. Collect images and photographs of natural things from newspapers or any available source and recognize the presence of principles of balance, rhythm, proportion, contrast, harmony, center of interest and classify your images accordingly. Write brief description of how a particular principle is visible in the image or a photograph. Activity 5. Draw a rectangle of 10 cm by 15 cm. Yes, use a pencil to draw the rectangle. Using compass, draw a circle of any size inside the rectangle. Do not draw a circle in the center of a rectangle. Then you can draw 4 rectangles or squares of different sizes. They can overlap each other as well as the circle. Now draw 3 triangles of different sizes in such a way that the overall composition looks good. These triangles can overlap each other as well as circle and rectangles. Now you have a composition with many divisions. Now trace the composition and make at least 10 copies. Now fill up these compositions using the above mentioned color scheme. So students, in our next program, we will talk about indigenous graphic design and culture. Till then, take care.